Hey Baba. Am I on? Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. For the last 2 days, we've been hearing accounts and seeing films and remembering that wonderful month in 1955 where Baba revealed to many of his lovers, perhaps as never before, his personal side, the intimacy of give and take between the lover and the beloved. It would seem perhaps that some of the foundation of Baba's relationship with his lovers, part of that perhaps, was established at that time. Well, there was a little submotif that continued throughout the Sahabas. From time to time, Baba would mention a book that was about to be published, God Speaks, of course, and occasionally he would give explanations of it or talk about matters that he said would be explained more fully there. Interestingly enough, God Speaks is as opposite from Sahabas as you could be. It's about the impersonal God, the universal God, God, the only reality. And it came out the very same month that he was giving this intimate Sahabas to his lovers. So today, that is our subject. This is the 50th anniversary to the month of the publication of one of the most extraordinary books, by my rating, the most extraordinary book I've ever seen or heard of. Explanations such that recorded history has not seen before. Baba said in 1927 something about his own explanations. This is much earlier, of course, but I think it is pertinent and useful. Baba said, "My explanations are quite different from the scriptures of any religion, and they have nothing to do with the Sharia aspect of any religion. None of the great masters in the past have given such explanations as I have. They were great masters, great prophets, and they realized so many souls. However, what they gave or left to the world was only shariat, sweet syrup. They gave internal knowledge, gnosis means realization, only to their close disciples who were very, very few. What they said and what was written down to make books was only the knowledge and rules of rituals and ceremonies, appealing to the ordinary minds of the time, while what I give is the explanation of the knowledge that is beyond the scope of the ordinary intellect to grasp and understand. Even though the explanations are mere shadows of real knowledge, they are beyond the mind to follow." Now this is an interesting point, Baba says. "The very foundation of all my explanations is sanskaras, which no religion has explained. I have so clearly and logically put it. Nowhere are sanskaras explained so elaborately or so eloquently." And about God Speaks specifically, Baba said to the Telugu group, perhaps some will remember that, "You will find God Speaks a very unique book. Never before have such things been disclosed by me. You will understand through your mind the why and wherefore of your being. After reading it, do not pretend that you are God. Unless and until you experience it, it is nothing." So today we're going to be talking in a very basic way this morning, trying to review some of the basic contents of God Speaks without our own interpretation coming in more than is minimally necessary. Some of you, of course, will have read God Speaks. Baba did encourage the 1955 Sahabasis to read it, as you'll see on the back page of your little booklet. Some of you perhaps will have read it. Many perhaps will have not, and perhaps never will. God Speaks may be your cup of tea, or it may not. There are different minds and different temperaments. I happen to be someone it appeals to my mind very much, so I enjoy the subject. But whether this is something that you like to think about or not, we have today the 50th anniversary of it. This is a good chance for us all to remember, to review some of these themes, and perhaps to develop a deeper understanding than what we have had before. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about the background of God Speaks within the context of Baba's own lifetime. In 1925-26 at MeherBabaLibrary, Baba really began to give his, I'll say, cosmology, his explanations of God and creation and the universe in a very elaborate way. Of course, during this period, he wrote the book in his own handwriting. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. I hope you can understand my English also. Okay. He began to write the book and completed it by 1926. I'm not going to speculate on what's in the book. The manuscript has not been found, so someday perhaps it will be found and we can speak more in detail. In that period also, though, we have some manuscripts where Baba's explanations appear. Let me mention especially a manuscript that's going to be published under the title Infinite Intelligence. Sharia Foundation in Myrtle Beach will be publishing it, get this, later this month. It's 50 years since the Sahabas and the publication of God Speaks. 50 years later, we're having a commemoration of that Sahabas, and the manuscript that is more like God Speaks than any other is being published later this month by a complete coincidence. So soon many of you will be able to, read in this book for yourself. Some of the common themes emerge from the very beginning, like the divine theme, Baba, the journey of the soul from unconsciousness to infinite consciousness is there. Sanskaras, the spiritual hierarchy, the different spheres. Some of these themes, which I'm sure most people are familiar with in one way or another, were there from the very beginning. In 1934, Baba traveled to America, going to Hollywood. The plan then was to create a film on the subject of the divine theme. We have this chart blown up here, which illustrates it. This chart by Ron O'Galey. It's in the book, God Speaks. And for that purpose, Baba dictated a lot of more material and created another chart. We're not sure what chart that was. Later on, most of you are familiar with the book, The Discourses, right? Meher Baba's Discourses. Between 1938 and 1942, the Meher Baba Journal was published in Bangalore and here, a monthly journal devoted to Baba by Baba's disciples. And for each month, Baba gave a discourse he himself dictated, usually through Dr. Deshmukh. And a lot of these, the content of God Speaks, you'll find there. It's presented in a different form, however. It's more oriented towards the lover, seeker of God, leading a daily life, giving things that are useful to his understanding. It's presented from that point of view. In the next year, 1943, Baba had a Sahabas here in MeherBabaLibrary, and I forget how many men were invited. I don't know if there are any here who were there. That was a long time ago. And Baba had, I don't know if the book was published yet, but The Divine Theme it's called. It's actually reprinted in the supplement of God, The Divine Theme. In the supplement it's there, along with several charts. And there we start to see a lot of the content of God Speaks, in brief, set forth. Now, God Speaks itself, the beginnings of it, come from the late 1940s. Many of you may have heard of Dr. Ghani, Dr. Abdul Ghani. He was a brilliant man, a disciple of Baba's from the very start, from 1922, or he actually was a childhood friend even before Baba was God realized. And Ghani is well known for his brilliance. He's very, very humorous. Baba loved his humor. He's also very famous for his laziness. He was about the laziest disciple, perhaps, that Baba ever had, along with one of the most intelligent. And that comes into our story because Baba dictated to Ghani a lot of points. We presume the first draft of God Speaks, you might say, and Ghani would write them out. And Baba kept saying, when are you going to get the work done, Ghani? And he delayed and delayed and delayed. At one point, Baba had him sign an agreement. He had him sign a contract saying that he would finish this book by the end of 1948. Even that was not enough. He didn't finish the lazy bum, you know. So then 1949, the new life began. You know the new life in October 16th, 1949, and finished. Things like a manuscript of God Speaks were off the map. And at the end of the new life, Dr. Ghani died. I think it was 1951 he died. So now when Baba came back from the new life, and when he went to the West, he traveled to America in 1952. He had an accident there in Oklahoma, all that. Baba brought with him what Dr. Ghani had written up. And Baba said he was going to review it while he was there, and did so. And at the end of that time, Baba said half of what I said to Ghani he didn't even put in there. Even though Ghani understood Baba very well, he was, really the man for the job, you might say, were it not for his inability to finish the job. But Baba said he would have to dictate it all over again. And he did so. In Dehradun in August 1953, Baba began to dictate what we have now as God Speaks. And this continued for some time in Mahabaleshwar in 1954. At the Sahavas in 1954, the 3 incredible weeks, the final declaration at that Sahavas. At the end of that, Baba gave the manuscript to Lud Dimphal, who was from Sufism Reoriented. And Sufism Reoriented undertook to publish it. And it was originally published by a very reputed publisher in New York. In those days especially, perhaps still, but certainly then, New York was the publishing capital of the world. And Dodd Mead, the name of the publisher, was a very well-respected publisher. So during this Sahavas, the book came out. And Baba was referring to it from time to time. Let me read what Baba did say to some of the Sahavasis. He said, I want you all to take particular note that I would feel happy if each one of you not only possessed and read and digested God Speaks from the first to the last page as the last book of its kind by me. I will likewise be happy if those among you who can possibly do so will see that this work is translated and made available in as many languages as possible for those who cannot read and understand English. God speaks, to speak somewhat impressionistically here, it's almost like it's the voice of the ocean itself, the ocean of God, telling to humanity in intellectual terms, as far as we can understand it, how it all is, what the reality is. Of course, we can never understand this through the intellect. Baba said this many times. But it gives us some idea of what this phenomenal appearance that we see, what it is, and what its relations are to the ultimate source in God. So let me talk a little bit now about some of the contents of God Speaks. Of course, several of our other speakers will develop on particular aspects of it. So I'll give some general overview, and we have some charts here that may be helpful in doing that. And I have my pointer to point to places in it. God Speaks I'll just talk about the main text and not say anything about the supplement. The main text is divided into 10 chapters, or they're actually called 10 parts. There were originally... There were originally 10 charts in it, but then 2 charts were added. We have 12 now. We have 12 charts at present. This is chart 8A and that's chart 8B. Thus you'll see 1 through 11 listed in the table of contents. I want to mention in particular that you may have heard in the film last night, Baba said that 2 charts of Rano Gales were to be studied at the Sahavas. Let me ask the Sahavasis from that time if anyone racking your brains can remember which charts those are, but we have figured out one of them. Chart number 7, this one here from God Speaks. Apparently, this was there in the 1955 Sahavas. And I guess there was another chart. We don't know if it was from God Speaks or not, but that seems likely. Now, look, I do need to look at these from time to time. See what I've forgotten. Yeah. Let me mention another thing about God Speaks that some of you who have read it will have experienced. It's very repetitive. It seems to go over the same points again and again. To a large degree, this is quite deceptive. When you study God Speaks closely, you find that Baba is actually bringing in new material. So it's not to be fooled by that. There's another point I would like to say about this. Sometimes you'll see one sentence repeats a lot of material from the previous sentence. Well, this is not an ordinary book. Its purpose is not simply to give a whole bunch of new ideas. Baba is actually trying to give us a feel for what he says. A lot of people find if you read God Speaks aloud, especially in a group, you start to experience the enchantment or the hal or the intoxication of it. It's like, a bagula. It's like God Speaks, a big pot. God Speaks is like a big, huge bagula. And when you start to read it, Baba throws you in. It's not just to read and understand, it's to get it into your skin, to have it saturate you. And the style of God Speaks is very helpful for that. Now I'll go over some of the major themes that we have in God Speaks. The central single theme, which is also in the divine theme, is represented in this chart. And I dare say most people, Baba lovers, will be familiar with these ideas to some extent. The basic movement now this is the story, it's a divine story. It's a narrative. Never before that I'm aware of has this theme been presented so clearly or in this way as the journey of the individual drop to the ocean. This idea was in Advaita Vedanta, of course, and it's part of Baba's basic presentation of the world, that the individual self is God, without any qualification. God is the reality, the universe is an appearance, an illusion. Another language Baba used for this is God is everything and illusion is nothing. But then, so that idea in India has been around for a long time. Not in other parts of the world. It's one of the great contributions of India to world culture that I am God, Aham Brahmasmi. But how does this drop become God? How does that actually happen? Here is where Baba's story, his narrative, comes into the picture. And in brief, everything starts in the beyond state of God, the state of sound sleep. And the beginningless beginning, God suddenly awoke and said, "Who am I?" You know? That's the original word of God is, "Who am I?" God had the whim to know himself. It was a whim. I mean, Baba once said of this, why did God wake up and want to know himself? It's like supposing a man is walking by a lake, right? A lake or a pond, and he picks up a stone and throws it in. I've done that. Maybe you've done that. Why? I don't know. It's fun. It's sort of, you just want to do it. Baba said there's no explaining the whim. It's a whim. It happened. God wanted to know himself, and that is the source of all of us here and everything else. We're that same God asking that same question, who am I? This led to the first outcome of that. Infinite intelligence will say more about this. But the first outcome of that is, instead of saying, God did say, "I am God," simultaneously he realized who he was. But at the same time, within this ocean of God, there was a huge explosion of bubbles. Baba gives this as a metaphor of bubbles on the ocean, right? Each one of them a false answer to that question. And the first answers were the opposite to God's nature, so to speak. God in the beginning was infinite, right? So at the beginning, God imagined in the stone state, or actually gaseous state before that, he imagined that he was most finite, most limited. His consciousness, instead of being infinitely expansive, was infinitesimally small. So God experienced himself to be the opposite of how he really was. Thus, opposites come into the picture. Okay? Now, from this point, we have the evolution of consciousness, which Mr. Kandali will speak about more. As God progresses through the various kingdoms, gaining more and more consciousness of, not of himself, of, I'll come to that in a minute, of the sanskaras that he accumulates in this process, until in human form, God is completely awake. Here we have, this is all of us, right? In human form through the course of reincarnation. Eventually, in human form, God gets sick of it and says, what is all this about? You know, this, because we're caught in this dream, this illusory dream, and then starts to go the other direction. He starts to get rid of the sanskaras he's been accruing until that time, progresses through the different spheres, the planes of consciousness, until in the end he realizes, I am God, I always was God, and all this that I thought I was nothing but a dream. And that's the end of the story. This is the basic narrative that Baba has given to us. I don't believe that it has been given before, certainly not with anything like this degree of clarity. Now, I read earlier where Baba said the foundation of his teaching is sanskaras, right? This, as far as I can see, the word is an old word, but Baba's use of it is something new, explaining what the basis for the growth of, what the mechanism was, the basis, the mechanism that allowed the growth of consciousness and that imprisons consciousness once the consciousness is mature. Now, an impression, sanskara, let's suppose this is a beach, right? You know, beach by the, say in Goa or Bombay, and I put my foot in the sand, it makes an impression, right? Or I take a photograph with film, it makes an impression. What happens to the jivatma is that each time the jivatma has an experience, it receives an impression from that experience. In evolution, that is what enables the consciousness to grow, by gathering more and more experience. But once human form is achieved, where we have complete consciousness, all these impressions that we've accumulated cause us not to know who we are. We go on experiencing these impressions instead of experiencing ourselves. This is the basic predicament that we face. That is why we experience ourselves as being in this pandal today instead of being the ocean of God. That's why we experience Meher Baba as a man instead of as his own reality. It's impressions, the whole thing is. And through the course then of the involution of consciousness, you get rid of these impressions until the game is done. Now what... Which time? Okay. What is an impression? An impression is really nothing. Infinite intelligence says more about this. It's like a limit. Do you know the word a limit? Let's suppose I'm looking out and I see a vast distance and a vast expanse. But then someone drops, let's say this is a curtain, right? I can't see anything. I'm limited. I see only that far. An impression is limitation and nothing more. A sanskara is just something that doesn't happen. It's a negation. It's nothing. What is it? It's nothing. They don't even exist. They just have an illusory existence. If you were to say, what are impressions made of? What are sanskaras made of? The only answer from infinite intelligence you can say is imagination. They don't even exist. And that is the foundation of the entire experience in illusion that we all have. Now I'm going to mention, this is the basis for the divine theme. In God Speaks, when you read God Speaks, all of what I've talked about so far, you could find in chapters 2 through 5, which are, evolution, reincarnation, the planes of consciousness. All of this is there. The organization of God Speaks, actually, it goes through this basic storyline, right, 3 times. The first time, chapters 2 through 5. Chapters 6 and 7 are on something else. Chapter 8 is about almost half the book, 40% of the book. There in chapter 8, Baba goes through this again, a second time, from a different point of view. And chapter 9, Baba goes through it a third time. It's the chart in the back that Eric Solibakke will talk about on the 10 states of God. So there is this fundamental repetition, but each time Baba is bringing a different perspective to it. Now in the remaining of my time, since no one else is talking about chapter 8, I'm going to bring up several of the important themes of chapter 8 that it's easy to overlook. It's only recently that I myself really paid attention to them. I'm going to start by talking about 3 trinities, 3 groups of 3. Again, this is from chapter 8, right? Where Baba goes through this, bringing these other points of view into it. One of them is the trinity of knowledge, power, and bliss. Knowledge, you are knowledge infinite, power infinite, and bliss infinite, right? I don't know how you say that in Hindi or Marathi. We have the phrase Satchidanand. It's not exactly the same thing. That comes up in God Speaks also. That's truth, knowledge, and bliss. We also have that in the Pravartigar prayer. But knowledge, power, and bliss is the trinity that's really important in God Speaks. And I don't know if you can see it now, but in the back here, if you can see, those who can see, okay, let's move that now. Yeah, that'd be nice. God in the beyond state, power, knowledge, bliss, right? These 3 attributes are rooted in the nature of God in state 2, which Eric Solibakke will be talking about. And they are especially important because they have a direct relationship to the 3 spheres. You're familiar, Baba talks about the gross sphere, the subtle sphere, and the mental sphere, right? And we have gross, subtle, and mental bodies. Most of us are conscious only of our gross bodies, but we have the subtle and mental also. These have a relationship with these 3 attributes, knowledge, power, and bliss. And God Speaks talks about this. Knowledge has a relationship with the mental sphere. Power has a relationship with the subtle sphere. And bliss has a relationship with the gross sphere. So, of course, when you get into illusion, bliss means bliss and misery. Power means power and powerlessness, and so forth. But there, as the whim unfolds, these attributes of God unfold themselves also, and one of the implications is this. Okay, there's much more to be said about that, but I'll move on to a second trinity that this time is rooted in the third state of God. Now, this is God as creator, preserver, destroyer, right? Emanator, sustainer, dissolver. The book Infinite Intelligence will say much more about this. Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Now, if this is an infinite state of God, Baba says in Infinite Intelligence, Ishwar is the Lord of the universe. If you pray for things like material things, he's the one who gives it to you. But the third state of God, its relationship is towards creation only. So Brahma creates everything, Vishnu preserves it, and Shiva or Mahesh destroys it. In Infinite Intelligence, Baba explains much more than we would have realized that this state of God is related to absolutely everything we could not go on experiencing for 1 second without that. This also has a relationship to time. There's a section of God Speaks where Baba mentions that Vishnu, the preserver, has a relationship to the present, and Mahesh has a relationship to futurity, and Brahma has a relationship to the past. Okay, the third trinity I want to mention is the states of the individual soul, and there are 3 fundamental ones: sound sleep, dream, and wakefulness. Of course, we all know what these things are, and these recur throughout. In Infinite Intelligence, there's much, much more about how these come up. These come up in Vedanta also. We could, Baba does talk in this 8th chapter, as the soul goes down through evolution. I'll use this chart. To this whole part of it, right? Baba calls this, it's like a divine dream. God begins in sound sleep, passes through a divine dream until he's wide awake in human form, but in human form is falsely conscious. Then it passes through, in Infinite Intelligence, Baba explains, he passes through the dream again until he experiences sound sleep and wakefulness. So these 3 trinities, knowledge, power, bliss, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, and sound sleep, dream, and wakefulness, are fundamentally interwoven throughout this whole game and throughout all the 10 states of God. Okay, the last word that I'll have to say, there are many, many more things one could talk about, even in this one chapter, but is about the spiritual hierarchy. Baba explained about this with great detail, and about the different types and the different states and the different human types that comprise the hierarchy. Information we've never had before. What is especially of interest, there are different types of God-realized souls. Some people, some souls who realize God simply do that, and that's the end of it. They have nothing more to do with this illusion. They're called majuts. There are others who return to consciousness of the universe, but don't do anything. They have no duty. There are still others who function with duty as perfect masters. But apart from all of these is when God himself directly descends into human form as a man, as the avatar, which happens once every 700 to 1400 years. Of course, Meher Baba is the avatar of this age. And as the 8th chapter concludes, when he descends, the avatar descends, he becomes the sole authority. Okay, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Jai Baba. Good. Baba Ki Jai. So the 10 states of God. This chart is very similar to the chart that we've been looking at all morning, except that that chart concentrates on this area down here, and this chart has all of this new material in here. So I'm going to talk about this material initially. This is God in the beyond state, the same as the black image on the other chart. This is the original state of God. This is the unspeakable, that which cannot be described. It has no attributes. You can't say it's formless. You can't say it's not formless. You can't say anything about it. The moment you say something about it, you are actually talking about God in the beyond state, who, as Baba tells us, is the God that is normally addressed in the world religions. God the Father and Allah and Paramatma, Ahura Mazda. This God in the second state. So the question is, how did the second state get here? Where did that come from? And as the speakers have said, there came this whim, to say that it's the question, who am I, is to project language into that state. And language was not there at that time, so it was more something like, something like that happened. And simply because that happened, a new state of God came into being. It's unthinkable in God in the beyond state that anything like that should happen. It's inconceivable. There is no prospect of it. This is the word Baba uses, prospect. There is no prospect of it. And yet, in fact, it happened. So therefore, we have a whole new set of circumstances. And he's very clear that God in the beyond state is the same consciousness as God in the beyond state. However, now what was totally latent in the beyond state now has a new prospect of unfolding. And one of the key understanding there is that this question, who am I, when that arises, it arises both as knowing and as not knowing. So fully unconscious, which is this state too, fully unconscious, and this state also arises, these substates, A, B, and C. This state over here also arises, which is the state of knowing. So of infinite consciousness. So at the same moment, infinite unconsciousness and infinite consciousness arise at the same time. Now Baba is very clear that this is a mystery which our intellects are not going to master. He gives some examples, or he gives in the 10 states of God, where he is talking about this chart, he gives the example of an infant who is conceived in the womb of a woman and developing, and as soon as that infant develops eyes, then it has the potential either to see or to not see. Both aspects are there. And here both aspects appear when the whim moves through this profound deep sleep state. In another place in God Speaks, I believe it's in God Speaks, Baba gives another example of that. He says, if someone says, I don't know how to swim, that includes both knowing and not knowing. Knowing that you don't know how to swim, and also not knowing how to swim. So something like that, with this dual aspect, went through this absolutely unified state of God, and the infinite consciousness came, infinite unconsciousness came. Now, this also came, but I'm going to hold this one for later, if you don't mind. And so this state of infinite consciousness is the I am God state. It is the total realization of infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss. It is, however, not using any of these powers, not even aware of all of this evolution and involution which happens down there. No awareness of it at all. So there is no place to use power. The idea does not arise. And now, what we have been talking about mostly this morning is what unfolds down this line then, once this infinite ignorance appears with the motive power, with the motor of who am I driving it and driving it. As soon as that happens, there also comes into being then God as the emanator and the sustainer and the destroyer. Because now something is going to come into form and will eventually also pass out of form. These arise together to emanate and to destroy, two sides of the same coin. And then to sustain, it's the same or similar to a beginning and a middle and an end. And the Baba doesn't say very much about that in God Speaks. And Ward Parks told me that this new book that is coming, Infinite Intelligence, has a great deal to say about this state of God. So hold on, folks, it's coming. This month. All right, then because the creation is set in form, and because sanskaras have now started, the first impression has started. The first impression was of infinite limitation, and that first impression gave rise to this state right here, which on the other chart there is the gaseous state that you see kind of pouring out of God, the gaseous state. And that is God as an embodied soul. This is the first form that is impressed around God, or that is limiting God. And it's Baba makes it clear that to call it a gas is far beyond the definitions of current science, and yet it is a gas. And it goes through forms, and by the time it gets to the fourth form, it would be, it's almost a gas. It almost has enough density to be what we would recognize as a gas. But in the seventh form, it does actually become what we recognize as a gas, becomes hydrogen, and there is an electron present. So this gaseous form is happening here. And now, a lot has been said about the form that comes out of that. That's the fifth form, which is the evolution with the stone and the metal. And so perhaps I don't need to say much more about that. Finally, through evolving through these forms, shall I just repeat them one more time? The stones, the metals, the vegetables, the worms, the fishes, the birds, the animals, and finally the human. He also mentions that the form, the human form, is I believe that was said, is latent in the stone form. So the human form is actually in the stone form right from the beginning, and the form is head down. And as it passes through the evolution, it becomes head up, and finally the human form. Now we haven't said very much about the sixth standard, which is the class that most of us are in, I believe, and where we are reincarnating. Baba says that the sanskaras, the impressions, make their presence known to us through desires. So in the reincarnation states, we are fulfilling desires. And by fulfilling desires, we are getting experience. Our consciousness is expanding. We are learning. I dare say that everyone in the room here has the experience of having learned something and become greater by that learning. And this is the unfoldment of nothing, because let's make that clear. God in the beyond state is everything and is the reality. And what comes, and God in the beyond state also is that reality, but because of the whim, a nothing is now the opposite of everything. Nothing has now come into being, and all of this evolution and involution, it's all the unfolding of nothing. And so that's what we're doing. We're unfolding nothing, which we experience as desires. And at a certain point, it was mentioned that at a certain point we began to get tired of these desires. The impressions, the limitations, as Ward so clearly showed us, these limitations, we began to be impatient with them. We began to see through them. They get less and less dense, and we began to see through them. And I like to think of the turning toward involution as that point at which the human being who is fulfilling desires and fulfilling desires and fulfilling desires begins to understand that it's more practical to eliminate desires than to fulfill them. And that is the moving into the involution stage. And now, having traversed all of the human experience and through the gross, subtle, and mental worlds, the soul, that is the sixth planes, and at the seventh plane, the soul comes to this original state that was created at the first whim. And this is the state of absorption in realization of God, in the I am God state. This is the state of the Majzu, or the Brahmi Bhut. Experiencing infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, not aware at all of all of this that's going on down here. No awareness of that at all. And yet, that state, for some, begins to shift, and the awareness of the whole of evolution and involution begins to become aware to the state who is absorbed in God. And sometimes it comes as absorption in evolution or the world or the nothing, and absorption in reality or in God, in the I am God state. And that is a Paramhansa. That's a Paramhansa. So alternately absorbed in the I am God state and sometimes aware of the nothing. And sometimes, though, it comes to both simultaneously. So the being is aware of both the whole of the creation, the whole of the nothing, and the I am God state simultaneously. And that would be Jivan Mukta. Now, both of these states, which are now here, this is state 9, they are without spiritual duties in the spiritual hierarchy. They are just frosting on the cake. And so they don't have any direct responsibilities in the spiritual hierarchy. However, they're of enormous benefit to the entire creation, and they're of unspeakable benefit to those who are near them and in their presence. And Baba says that a Jivan Mukta when he is about to drop his body, will make one other person equal to himself. Now, we've been saving this state C, which also came into existence when the whim occurred in the beyond state of God. And this is the state of those who are fully aware of the entire creation, fully aware of their divinity. They have also responsibility in the spiritual hierarchy. These are perfect masters. They are using their powers for the benefit of the entire creation and all humanity and all the creatures and all the levels of evolution. They are the perfect masters, the masters of the creation, and also the avatar. He incarnates with this consciousness. As far as I know, the only difference is that or not the only difference, but a major difference is that the avatar has a much greater scope for his work than each of these or any of these perfect masters. Now, this form here, there's no form. This consciousness here is formless. It has no attributes or any qualities to it at all, except infinite power, knowledge, and bliss. The form C that the avatar and the perfect masters come in has form, has attributes, has everything there. This, you see here, this is the state 10, substate C. Now, I think I've said something about everything right around the clock, the infinite clock. And the Beloved, as you know, has us always in his heart. So he ends his explication of the 10 states of God with an even further simplification, where he says there are really just 5 stages that are important and that we should notice. And the first stage is this, where what is the nothing that is latent in the beyond state begins to manifest. The possibility of its manifesting begins here. Of course, it doesn't manifest until it moves, but this is the first state, God and the beyond, that we should remember. And then all of this which flows out of that, he just lumps together as one state. This is our school. We go to school. We're not graduate yet. We're still here in the 6th standard. And then the third state that he points out is this state of the Brahmi Bhut, which is absorption, total absorption in the divine, infinite power, knowledge, and bliss. And this state here, it's 9. You see this red line underneath? The state is right here. It's called the divine junction, where there is both present at the same time, but no duties and no use of powers. And this is the Paramhansa and the Jivan Mukta. So we should remember this. This is the 4th of our stages. And then finally, the 5th, which is the state of the perfect masters and the avatar. So if we remember those 5, we have the essence of the 10 states of God. The essence of God speaks in one little pattern that we can hold in our hands. 5 fingers. Jai Baba.